Hello everyone and welcome to Adam Shah Weekly. In this video, I'm going to show you that how you can use MVVM design pattern with a core data app written in SwiftUI, and we will be using the NS fetch results controller so we don't have to call functions on core data to refresh. It will automatically refresh. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we need to do is we need to add our core data model. So let's go ahead and search for model over here or data, and we can create our particular model. I can call this a budget app model. Currently, the model doesn't really have any entities, so it's not going to save anything. Let's go ahead and add an entity, and I will go ahead and say this entity is called budget. It will have a number of attributes like title. That can be a string, and also total, which can be of type double. And we will also make sure that these are not optional. This means they are required. All right, so that's it. So we have created our data model, which is our core data model, which will allow us to save a budget entity. And by default, it's going to save it to SQLite database. It will have a property called total and a title. The next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we are initializing core data. So I'm going to create a folder called managers, and inside that managers, I'm going to go ahead and create a file called core data manager. And we have written this file a number of times. So let's go ahead and see how we can write that. Import core data, class core data manager. The purpose of core data manager is to initialize the core data stack. And in order to initialize the core data stack, we will use the persistent store container, and that will be a persistent store container. And we will return you the same exact object of core data manager. So we're going to create a singleton. So here we go, core data manager. In order to create the singleton, we need to make sure that nobody can create an instance. So I'm going to go ahead and do it like this, basically creating a private initializer. And inside the initializer, I'm going to go ahead and initialize the NS persistent container, passing in the name of the model that we just created, which is called budget app model. So you can see this is the same as this. Next up, we're going to use persistent store container.load persistent store. We will get the description. We will get the error if there's any error. If there is any error, then, well, everything is failed, so we can't really do anything. We can simply say unable to initialize core data and kind of like display the error. All right, so this will be all the code that you need to initialize the core data stack. The next thing we want to do is we want to inject the view context into our environment so that we can access it inside our views. So I'll go to the budget app, and we will go ahead and create an instance. Well, first of all, we will get access to the view context. We can use our core data manager, the one we just created, and this will give us a view context. And finally, we can go ahead and inject that view context by saying environment and manage object context and the view context. This means that the view context will now be available to the content view, and it will also be available to all the other child views, children's of content view. All right, let's go back to the content view. The first thing you will note about this content view is, well, we're not displaying anything inside the content view right now. And the content view is kind of like displayed on the right-hand side in Xcode preview. So that's fine. I mean, we can access the manage object context using our environment variable. So I will simply go ahead and say manage object context, and now I can use environment variable. The other thing that we want to do is to create the view model associated with our content view. So the view model that we're going to create for content view, I'm going to put it inside a different folder, and I will say view models. And when I'm creating a view model, I'm going to go ahead and create a new file, and I will call it budget list view model. So this will be my view model, which is going to be working with the budget list, meaning it is responsible for providing the data to the content view to display all the different kind of budgets that I have, or will I, whenever I create those things. Okay, so now we have the content view, we have the view context. Somehow we need to give this view context that we have created to the budget list view model. All right. So in order to create the content view, what we can do is we can make sure that when we are creating the content view, in order to create the content view, we need to pass in a budget list view model. And in order to create a budget list view model, we can make sure that you pass in the manage object context, because the budget list view model will have the functions like save and delete and all that stuff that we will require. All right, so how do we do that then? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is inside the budget list view model, I'm going to create a property which is called context. This will be a NS manage object context. And now I can go ahead and create the initializer. So NS manage object context, I can go ahead and assign the context. And I can call super.init for now, but we don't really need the super.init for now, but since we just want to create an instance of budget list view model. So this means that in order to create a budget list view model, we need to pass in the context. So let's go back to the content view. And inside the content view, you can see that we are not creating the budget list view model. All right. So now the question becomes, okay, in order to create the content view, we need to pass in a budget list view model. So view model, budget list view model, and we will have to create a property over here, private var budget list view model, which is budget list view model, and then we can say budget list view model equals to VM. All right. Now, obviously, it's complaining over here because when we are calling content view, we need to pass in the budget list view model, which we are not. So let's see what we can, how can we fix this problem. So now I can say budget list view model, but now I require to send a context, and I can go ahead and probably access the context from my core data manager. So core data manager.share.persistent.store.view context, and then finally pass in the view context. Now this is now going to complain because in order to create the content view, now you need to pass in the budget list view model. So if you go over here into the app, it is complaining that you created the content view, but you never pass in the view model. So let's go ahead and pass it. Perfect. And this is now much better because in order to create the content view, now we are passing in the budget list view model. And in order to create the budget list view model, we are passing the view context. So the budget list view model will have access to the context, which is great. Now, let's work on adding something before we do anything else, because we need to make sure that we are adding a particular budget. And in order to do that, we will go ahead and create a VStack. Right now, we're not really displaying the budget, so that's fine. If we're just displaying the text called budgets, that's perfectly okay. We can go ahead and start with a toolbar. All right. And let's see if the toolbar actually appears. We may have to use like a navigation view. navigation view. There we go. And we will also go ahead and say navigation title, and we will say budgets. There we go. So we have a navigation title. I also do want to use a toolbar. So let's go ahead and create a toolbar. Toolbar item. And we will have the placement, which will be kind of like the trailing placement of a button. So we can create a button and we can say add new budget. Hopefully it will appear. There we go. Let's save it. And there we go. So we have our add new budget appearing. Now, whenever we press on add new budget, we need to open up a new sheet that will take us to a different page. All right. So in order to open up a sheet, I'm going to go ahead and create is presented. And whenever you click a button, I'm just going to go ahead and say is presented equals to true. Okay, that's fine, but we still need to make sure that the sheet is getting displayed. So sheet is presented, dismiss. We're not really going to do anything. This is just for dismiss. And whatever the content you want to show, which over here will be add budget screen, which we don't have. And in order to create add budget screen, we will pass in the add budget view model, and we will also pass in the view context to that view model. So a couple of different things we need to create. We need to create add budget screen. We need to create add budget view model. Let's go ahead and start with the view model. Add budget view model. So add budget view model will be responsible for whatever is happening on the add budget screen. So add budget view model, which is observable object. And once again, we are going to make sure that you pass in the context because we will be needing that. And in order to create an instance of add budget view model, you need to pass in the context. There we go. Now we also need to make sure that we are creating the add budget screen. Add budget screen. Perfect. The add budget screen looks fine. One of the things that we are going to do is you are going to be passing in the add budget view model to create that. So in order to create the add budget screen, you need to pass in the add budget view model. View model, add budget view model, self.viewModel equals to VM. And now we need to also satisfy the condition over here to create or to pass a view model. And in order to create the view model, we must pass the view context. So we have to do all of that stuff over here again. Add budget view model, context, view context. Okay. Let's go ahead and run our application, and we will see that if it is able to show us the add screen or not. That's the first thing we need to find out, that are we able to add a new budget or not. So I'm going to tap on add new budget. It does show me the screen. So that is all fine. Okay. So it looks like it's working okay. Now we need to actually work on the add budget screen. All right. So before doing that, let's go to the add budget view model and create all the different things that we need. So what is add budget view model capturing? Well, it's going to capture the name of the budget and the total. So that's why we have that. Now let's go ahead and go to the add budget screen, and we will make sure that the add budget screen can display all of that information, meaning add budget screen will have some sort of a capability for asking you for the budget. So basically we need forms. We need a text field. I will say enter the title of the budget, the name of the budget, or the title of the budget, and the text that's going to go into vm.name. and there is nothing over here. Now you can see that it's not recognizing what is $VM. That's because when we created the instance of add budget view model, we did not decorate it with this state object. Now, if you go ahead and decorate this with the state object, then it's going to complain that you can't do that because VM is get only property. So you will have to use over here observed object. An observed object can be assigned, so then it will work. The same thing we need to do for the total. So let's go ahead and do the total. And finally, we will have a save button to save this particular budget. Let's go ahead and refresh our UI so that it can display something. And we can also go ahead and say navigation title, add new budget. So it will look nice. Let's see if the title, well, it's going to appear if I go ahead and probably wrap this around with navigation view. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this around with the navigation view. So I get the navigation bar or something on the top. There we go. The save button, it might be a good idea to center it. I can create an extension to do that. So let's go ahead and create a new group. I will call it extensions. I mean, there are multiple ways that you can center your button, but it will be a good idea to create some sort of a helper function that will allow you to do that. So view plus extensions, and it will be a very, very simple extension. The whole point of extension is to simply make sure that your button or any kind of a view is centered. And one of the ways of centering anything is using the horizontal stack. So I will simply call this center horizontally, and this is going to return me some sort of a view. I will simply go ahead and use a H stack. I will render self, which can be any view. So I'm just going to put this inside or between the spacers so that it centers itself. And now I can simply say center horizontally, and it should center, as you can see. Great. Okay, so this is great, but the save button doesn't really do anything right now. So we need to make sure that we are saving it. I can go ahead and create an instance of the budget, passing in the context, which I should have somewhere. Kind of weird that I don't have that context over here. So we need to make sure that we are passing in the initializer to create that context. So let's first go ahead and create the context. All right. So currently we are on the, well, we're not going to create this over here. I think I'm doing it wrong over here. If we are trying to save, we will call the save function on the add object or add budget view model. So I'm just going to go ahead and say over here, viewModel.save. Now there is no such thing as viewModel.save, where viewModel is the add budget view model. So I can always go to the add budget view model and create that particular function. So let's go ahead and create a function called save, which is going to save our data to the persistent storage. We will create an instance of the budget. We already have access to the context, so we can simply pass that context over here. We can go ahead and say title equals to name, and then we can say budget.total equals to double and total, or else we will simply say 0. And now we can go ahead and call save, but there is no function called save. Now I can go ahead and say context.save, and that is going to work, but it would be nice if we are just able to save like this. I mean, this is, I think, much nicer, right? If we do that. So let me show you how you can do all of these kind of things. So there is no save function on the manage object budget. In order to create the save function, we can always perform an extension on the budget. So that's one way of doing things. So another thing that we can do is also create a base model. So let me go ahead and first create an extension. And you create an extension so that you can add more features to your budget manage object. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a budget plus extensions. Import core data, extension on the budget. So we are extending this class that was generated by core data, and it's going to be using base model. Now, what is this base model? Where is this coming from? Again, good question. Let's go ahead and create the base model. The base model is going to provide all the default features to all the different manage object contexts, or not manage object context, but basically the manage objects. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a base model. So all the common functions, that means saving and deleting, we can create this particular protocol base model, which can provide all of those different things. I'm just going to go ahead and create base model. And base model will also have access to the view context. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's manage object context, get. Base model will also be able to provide save function and also be able to provide the delete function. Now, one thing that we're going to do is we are going to provide some sort of a default implementations for the save and the delete, and also for the view context. So static var view context, ns manage object context, and we can simply return it from the core data manager, core data manager dot shared dot persistent container dot view context. Done. What about the save function? Well, for the save function, we can simply go ahead and say self, which is the static instance, the class instance, and then save. Perfect. But what about the delete function? Because the delete function is a little bit different. In order to delete something, we need to pass in the instance. Now, I can't really pass over here self because that will be the protocol itself. So I need to basically say that I can pass in self, which can be the instance that is conforming to base model, but I can also limit it by saying that the self in this case would be ns manage object, so that we know that self will always be, or the person who is conforming to base model will always be of type ns manage object, and that is something that we can use. Great. Okay, so now we can go back to our budget and then base model extension. So this means the budget will have all of those different functions, which also means that budget can now simply call budget.save, like I'm doing it right now. And this save function will be coming from the base model. Okay. So this is all fine. Let's go back to our screen, if we can find it. There we go. And after creating the budget, the other thing that we really want to do is we want to make sure that our sheet is closed. So let's go ahead and get access to the presentation mode. After we have saved, we can simply call presentation mode .wrap value .dismiss. And hopefully that will be able for us to save the information to the database. All right, hopefully. Now, there are multiple ways of checking if the information is saved in the database or not. It's always a good idea to go in the database and see if the information is actually saved or not. So how can we do that? How can we actually see in the database to debug core data? All right. So let me show you how we can do that. So basically what we're trying to do is that if I go ahead and run this application right now and add a new thing, so let's say that I'm adding a budget for watching movies, and let's say the budget is $100. Okay, so it's saved, but I don't know if it's saved or not. I mean, at this point, I have no idea if it's saved. So it would be a good idea to go to the actual database and check that if it's saved or not. And one of those things you can do is you can go to product, you can go to your schemes, and in the run schemes, in the argument section, you can pass in a debug flag for debugging your core data. So I can go ahead and simply say com.apple.coredata.sql debug and passing in the flag of 1, which means it's on. Now if I run the app, you should see a little bit more different stuff printed in our case over here. And one of the things that you will see is you can see all the different queries that are being run. So that's a good thing. But apart from that, you will also see the location of the file that it has created. So let's go ahead and copy that location. And now I should be able to open up a terminal, jump onto that location. Okay, and now I can see the file, the actual file, the SQLite file that contains the information. So I can go ahead and open this up using SQLite 3, which is already installed on your machine. So I can say app model.sqlite, and now I'm connected to the database. I can see the schema of the database, meaning different tables, and I can go through the table called zBudget. The casing doesn't really matter, but you can see that the movie that we entered is there. And that is a 100% proof that the movie, that the data that we tried to enter into our SQLite database, it is working perfectly fine. So if it's working fine, what will be our next step? Well, the next step would be, if I run the app right now, I should be able to display the data right over here. So let's go ahead and see how we can do that. Now, you might be very tempted to simply go to the content view and start typing the fetch request property wrapper, which was introduced new when the Swift UI was introduced a couple of years ago. It's not really a good idea to do that. And I'll tell you why it's not a good idea. It's not a good idea because whenever you use a fetch request property wrapper, you have to provide the actual core data model over here, and it's always going to return you the core data model. So in this case, I can go ahead and get access to budget. So now what we have done is that we have taken our view and we are now tightly coupled with the core data model. The core data model should not appear on the user interface or the UI or the view, and the view should not know anything about the core data models, because a model can be really complicated, but the view doesn't really need to know. And that also means that whenever you change the model, you will end up changing the view. So how can we make sure that we don't expose our core data model onto the view? Well, the first thing we will do is we will create a view model associated with what we want to display on the view. And the view model that we're creating is called the budget list view model. The budget list view model is responsible for displaying everything related to the budget. But we also want to target each item that we want to display. So what do we want to display? We want to display probably the title of the budget. So I'm going to create a nesting or a child model, which will be called budget view model. It's going to work on the budget, so you have to pass in the budget instance. And just to hide the budget instance, I'm going to make sure that you can access this budget outside of it, because that's our actual core data model. So the only thing you will be able to access would be the view model itself, the one that we are just writing right now. We will go ahead and create an ID property, nhmanageObjectID. We will return the budget.objectID. Now it's up to you, whatever you want to expose to the view, and the only things you want to expose to the view. So budget.title, and if the title is null, then return nothing. Same thing goes for the total. We can simply go ahead and say budget.total, and you can return the total. Okay, so this is fine. This is going to display every single item of the budget, or at least it will give the data to the view so that the view can display each item of the budget. But the budget list view model will be responsible for fetching all the different kind of budgets. So inside the budget list view model, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a property called budgets, which will be an array of budget view model. So there we go. And what we also want to do is whenever you add a new budget item using the add new budget, then it will notify the budget view model that something has been added. So if I go ahead and add a new budget item, then I don't have to call give me all the budgets again, because it should just already know. And that part you can do with creating something called the fetch results controller. So let me go ahead and create a fetch results controller. And fetch results controller is nothing new. It has been part of core data for quite a long time. So we need to make sure that we are initializing the fetch results controller. So fetch results controller equals to fetch results controller. And now you need to pass in a couple of different things. You need to pass in the fetch request. All right. So now the question is, well, how do we create this fetch request? So this fetch request is going to indicate that what are you trying to fetch? One of the good ways of creating this fetch request is in our extension, the extension that we created for the budget. So I can simply go ahead and say over here, all ns fetch request for the budget. We will go ahead and create a request, which can be a budget.fetch request. We need to sort, or we need to set up the sort descriptors also, because it is a requirement for the ns fetch results controller. And now we can return it. So let's go back over here. Now the good thing is that I can simply go ahead and say budget.all, and this is going to give me, that particular fetch request that we're talking about. For the context, we will simply pass in the view context. Section key name path is nothing, and the cache name is also nothing. So this will allow us at least to initialize our budget list view model with the fetch results controller. Now, currently, it's not really doing much. Just by initializing the fetch results controller will not do anything. We need to make sure that we put the delegate also. And the delegate basically means that whenever the fetch results controller returns you something, we need to get access to those things. All right. So we need to become a delegate for the fetch results controller delegate. So I'm going to go ahead and create an extension. You don't really need to create an extension, but usually it's a good idea to separate your code in this way. I'm going to create or use the fetch results controller delegate. And in order to do that, I believe we also need to make sure that we are conforming to NSObject. There we go. And inside the fetch results controller delegate, we need to implement just one function for now, which is called controller did change content. So I'm just going to go ahead and say controller did change content, which means that whenever the content is added, deleted, removed, and all that stuff, so this particular function is going to get fired. And when this function is going to get fired, we will go ahead and get access to the budgets, controller.fetch objects. We will make sure that those objects are of type budget array. Else, we're not going to do much. And finally, we can say budgets equals to budgets.map and budget view model dot init. All right. We still need to call super.init. So the main object is initialized. That's fine. Now, over here inside the controller did change content, which is part of the NSFetch results controller, we are setting up the budgets. Now, these budgets are the budget view model array. So we need to make sure that these things are always set on the main thread. So I'm just going to go ahead and use main actor over here so that we know that it is always set on the main thread. The other thing that we want to do is when the budget list view model is initialized, we need to just perform the fetch. So let's go ahead and do that. fetch results controller dot perform fetch. Again, we are going to get back our items. We will have to map them just like before. And if we catch any problem, we can simply display the error. All right. Okay, so that's it. That is how we will create our budget list controller. Now, if I go back to the content view and if I try to run this, let's see if it actually displays anything or not. Well, first of all, we're not really displaying anything anyways. So let's go ahead and make sure that we are displaying something. So we'll go to the content view. Instead of displaying the text, we will try to display something else. So we'll display list. There we go. And we're going to go with the budget. So budget list view model dot, or just for fun, I'm just going to use list and if for each budget list view model dot budgets. This is the array of budget view model. We will get access to the budget. And now we can go ahead and display the text. Budget dot title, I think. Let's go ahead and run this and see if the budget is being displayed. So you can see that the budget is being displayed. What about if I add a new budget? So I'm going to go ahead and add a new budget. And let's say this is dinner and 100. That's weird because it never really got the notification. Did it even go to the database? Let's go ahead and run it again to see if it went to the database or not. So it did went to the database, but when we use add new budget to add a new budget, it didn't really show us over there. So what exactly is going on? Well, the problem is that we never marked our budget list view model with being an observe object. Now you might be tempted to use state object over here, but state object is read only, so you can't really assign it over here. So we need to use observed object. And now I can go ahead and run this and try to add a different budget. So I'm going to go ahead and add a budget. So let's go ahead and say lunch budget. And there we go. You can see the lunch budget is, we don't really have to refresh anything. We don't have to fetch anything. Since we are using the NS fetch results controller, it does all of those things on our behalf. Now, one other thing that we would like to do is ability to delete an item. And the good thing is that since we're using the for each, we can simply go ahead and also delete the budget. So let's go ahead and create this function called delete budget. Private function delete budget. It does have to match a particular signature. There we go. Now we can go ahead and say offsets dot for each. We will get the index. Once we get the index, we will get the budget, which is a budget view model. We will get the index. And on that budget list view model, we will say delete budget, which doesn't really exist. And we will simply pass in the ID of the budget. So budget dot ID. So we don't really have anything called delete budget. So we need to make sure that we have that function. So what does delete budget looks like? So let's go over here and create a delete budget. Delete budget, which takes in a budget ID, NS manage object ID. The first thing we will do is I'm going to go ahead and fetch the budget. So context dot existing budget, and I will pass in the budget ID. Now for this, you can even create a separate function in an extension on the budget model, and that would be much better approach. Budget else return. So once we get the budget object, we can simply say budget.delete. I think it's much nicer, and it reads much nicer if you say budget.delete, right? And we have taken care of all of those stuff, all of those things in our base model. Okay, so let's go back to our content view, And hopefully when it deletes, the NSFetch results controller, which is right here, it's going to know it's deleted. And the controller did change is going to get fired, and we will just get all the stuff that we want. So dinner, so we'll remove the dinner, we'll remove the lunch, and you can see it's deleted. And if I go ahead and run this, you can see that I only have one. So it is deleted from the database. I can go ahead and add new one over here. Let's say if I am adding a dinner. So there we go. So we have created a core data application in SwiftUI when we're using the MVVM design pattern, and we ended up using the NSFetch results controller, which gives us all the functionality of reloading and all the different delegate callbacks that allows us to refresh the interface without having to call the functions ourselves. All right, so it's a bit of a work, as you can see, but it does allow us to create a much better flow of the application rather than going to the content view or any view and using fetch requests. I mean, fetch requests, if you are working on a small project, that should be okay, but in a larger application or a even medium-sized application, it's not really a good idea to expose your view with the objects that are of the core data objects or the core data managed objects. That's very not a good idea, because now you're exposing your whole data model to the view. Anytime the data model is going to change, which it will, your view is supposed to change also then. So that's not a good idea. It's very tightly configured system if you do that. So this technique, using the MVVM design pattern and creating these view models that uses the NSFetch results controller behind the scene, that is a much better approach in the end. Thank you. I hope you really like this video tutorial, and if you do, the best way to support my videos is to check out the Udemy courses that I have. You can see that I have many different Udemy courses ranging from MVVM design patterns, SwiftUI, Combine, Core Data, RxSwift, and much more. So check out the YouTube description for all the links, and I really hope that you enjoy my new courses. Thank you.